Thank you for joining us today for the PPD Research Seminar. Today we have a great paper on changing the economy in the Pearl River Delta in China to be more sustainable. This is done by Mark Pisano, who is a senior fellow at SPPD and a faculty member in the Bedrosian Center for Governance, where he teaches a class on Megaregions. Mark is an expert in urban planning, regional planning, transportation, and he's currently conducting research on infrastructure financing. For 31 years, he served as an executive director of the Southern California Association of Governance, the nation's largest regional planning agency, which includes 6 counties in Southern California. As executive director, he contributed greatly to the implementation of the Alameda Corridor Plan, which involved the construction of a 22-mile rail running from the Port of Los Angeles to Long Beach. We're very lucky to have Mark Pisano here. He, again, is an expert on regional planning and regional governance. He is joined today by the students who worked on the project with him at the China Lab. And so I would like them to take it away.
Nicole, thank you. And am I wired here? I'm on, Jonathan. First of all, I want to thank Nicole Borelli for making all the arrangements and for the school giving us the opportunity to, in fact, present the results of the last summer's China Lab. And I also want to thank a number of people who've come here today. Joyce Mann, who heads up the IPRAM program, and Joanna, is Joanna here? Joanna Yu, and Joanna and Joyce were absolutely instrumental in getting this lab off the ground, helping to organize it, to make contacts, and I'm going to explain the importance of contacts and networks, and it's a good model for how one operates in an international setting. So having people like Joanna, who knows individuals in China, has relationships with them, and to have a program like the IPRAM program that Joyce heads up was really very important in getting this lab off the ground. I also want to give special thanks to Chet Newland for coming. Chet Newland, many of you are not going to have the opportunity, or may not have the opportunity to take a class from him, but he is probably one of the most significant figures in the field of public administration in the country and globally. So Chet, thank you for coming. It's really an honor for you to be here. Let me just give you about a 5-minute or so background on the China Lab and how this particular program works, and I think most of them work the same way, so it's a good way to explain what I would consider one of the most one of the greatest opportunities that students have at USC, and if you haven't partaken in one of these international labs, I strongly urge you to do it, and you can talk to your classmates who participated in this lab, and they will probably give you chapter and verse about what we did. And what is it that we did? Well, first of all, the labs have a client. The lab's purpose is to provide, for all practical purposes, a living, breathing, consulting experience in which the students participate in a lab format with a client to perform a particular task, and to bring to bear the learning that is done on what we call the dry lab. It was a semester course in which we prepared for this particular lab, and then a 2 weeks super intensive experience in the field. And you can ask the students the number of hours that they spent in preparation, in paper writing, in working on this lab, and it's by far and away equivalent to, if not exceeding, the experience that one would get in a class by every measure. Who was our client? Our client was the Party University, let me say the Communist Party University of Shenzhen. And in that respect, and let me say a little bit about Shenzhen. Shenzhen, for all practical purposes, is the Silicon Valley of China. It's one of the special economic zones, and this particular special economic zone has a lot more incentives associated with it than the other zones that were created by Deng Xiaoping about 25 maybe 30 years ago to propel the economic growth of China. I'm not going to go into the history of the strategy other than to say Shenzhen 30 years ago was 500,000 people. Today it's 18 million people, and as you drive and you move throughout the region, it probably has more skyscrapers than New York City. It's a incredibly developed. I was there 30 years ago to see Shenzhen when it was really a small coastal port fishing village, and I was really impressed with what they have done in the last 30 years. It is truly one of the icons of the China miracle. What was the subject of our class? Of our assignment. It's really not a class, of our consulting assignment. The subject of our assignment was probably even more interesting than the lab itself. And the assignment was strategies for how this city, this area, could change its economic structure to be more of a consumer-based economy, and in making that transition, how could it deal with its environmental problems, particularly its air quality problems. That was the subject matter of the class. You cannot get an assignment that's more broad than that, or if you do, I'd like to see it. Because it's right at the core of what China needs to do. They've had this in their 5-year plan for the last 5 years, and they've had great difficulty in sorting the issue out. So they really wanted to know, the Party University, when we first arrived. By the way, let me say one other partner we had in the process before I talk about the Party University. It was the U.S.-China Institute in Hong Kong, and that institute was formally the host made the arrangements. We had a program in Hong Kong and before we went over to Shenzhen. So I want to call out Glenn Shady, who's the director of that institute. He arranged for us an impressive number of visits in Hong Kong, as well as invitations to a number of other events that were ongoing at that time. The Party University, when we first arrived, and I've been going to China now for the better part of 30 years, and let me just say that China, in my previous visits, was not transparent. China in its previous visits was very difficult to get in to see who you wanted to see and do what you wanted to do, and they controlled very much what you did and how you did it when you were there. And I prepared the students for that, and when we got there, the first night we met with Professor Yuan, and he met with us and the students, looked me in the eye, and he looked the students right in the eye, and he said, "I want your best thoughts. No holds barred. I don't want you to equivocate. I don't want you to tell me what you think I want to hear. I want you to tell me what you think about the subject that we assigned." And he went on to say, you're going to visit with whomever you want, wherever you want. And he arranged, and the school arranged, 5 faculty members to work with our class in each of the areas that we were interested in. So they had 5 specialists who had their own views and their thoughts that worked with teams. And in the U.S., we organized ourselves in teams based upon research here. And I'm not going to go through the categories. I think we had it's more important to say what we learned and what we did there. We also were in teams there, so we had a faculty member to work with each one of our teams. In addition to that, if we wanted to see a business leader, if we wanted to see a municipal leader, and when I mean leader, we talked to the deputy or the department head of the ministries in the city. There was no being pushed on and sloughed on to mid-level staff. We talked to the party leaders. We talked to the department leaders. And these are the, for all practical purposes, these are the individuals that really run that particular municipality. We also talked with NGOs. We visited with the U.S. consulate in Guangzhou, and in Hong Kong we had an opportunity to visit with NGOs, organizations that were working on the same issues, and researchers who were working on the issues that we were working on as well. In essence, we had an open book and an opportunity to really learn about China. Let me just say a few more things about our team. Then we're going to present what we learned. We'll present what the reaction has been, or was then, and has been to what we learned, and then the steps that, in fact, our work, the students are taking, and that we're working on right now, even though the course is finished. The important part of our work was conceptually, how do you take a subject like how do you change the economic base to make China more consumer friendly? How do you pick that apart so that in fact you can work on it, and so that you can get your hands around it, and furthermore understand it in terms of what's happening in China. And we were incredibly blessed with having a very diverse team. We had 13 students of the 23 who were from mainland China. They spoke the language. They knew the institutional structure, they knew the political structure, they knew the culture. We did not have to struggle with learning that information because we had an incredible reservoir, and they were from all different parts of the country. We had 5 students from Taiwan. We had a student from Hong Kong, and then we have 5 U.S. Students. Now, why I say blessed, we had the opportunity to have a true multicultural, multidimensional, and whenever you go to a foreign country, you always go to that country with your bias. I don't care how much you try to rid yourself of it, you have your own lens and your own thoughts and your own views. And I will tell you, as the instructor or professor in this particular class, the most important thing I learned, in addition to the subject matter, was how different the views were based upon which country the students came from, how they mixed it up, and they had different views, and they figured out how to take their differing views and to gel that into, I wouldn't call it a consensus view, because I don't think we all walked away with a unified consensus, but we all walked away from, we had a integrated sense of what is going on in China. I have had opportunities, Glenn Shady had me visit the Fulbright program at the end of our program, and these are all the Fulbright fellows from around the world who are studying or doing something on China. When I described them the work of our class, they were absolutely overwhelmed. And let me just say, listening to them and listening to the scholars on China, these students got a better understanding and had a better portrayal, I think, of what's going on there than even some of the world's, let's call them, most renowned students and researchers. So enough about process. Let's describe what we learned, and we're going to go through this quickly. By the way, in addition to looking at Shenzhen, our focus was Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Guangzhou, and the Pearl River Delta. And mind you, this whole area produces about 8 to 10% of China's GMP. So you can get a sense of how important it is economically. These are the first issue that we talked about was, or that we presented strategies at. And what we're going to do today is present basically the strategy and the findings. If you have questions behind it, or if you want to know how we arrived at these and what the analytics were, we can. But for brevity's sake, we're just going to run through what we, for all practical purposes, recommended to them. So on the economic side, Nanyan, you want to take us through that? Nanyan Han?
Sure. For the economic strategy, we firstly want to encourage a consumer-driven economy, and we have 4 recommendations. The first is to offer better public services, especially in housing, healthcare, and education. And specifically, here comes our second recommendation. That is, since the high cost of housing in Shenzhen is a serious problem, we want the Shenzhen government to provide affordable housing and public housing, and they can also learn lessons from Hong Kong. The third recommendation is the import substitution. It means to promote the building of self-serving economy in order to reduce its dependency on exports to foreign countries. And the fourth recommendation is to create regional integration. It means in the larger region, the further implementation of specific areas within the Great Pearl River Delta, which would specialize in different industries and focus on core competencies. And then we want to encourage a culture of entrepreneurialism and innovation. And we have 2 recommendations. The first is to attract a skilled workforce and investors. That means to provide both vocational training for the existing workforce as well as attracting fresh talents. And the second recommendation is to develop a regional culture of innovation and creativity. And for this side, we can apply the experiences and lessons from the Silicon Valley to help Shenzhen to build an innovation and creativity culture and environment. And in particular, we have 4 suggestions for Shenzhen to boost up the entrepreneurialism. The first is to create and enforce intellectual capital protection policies. The second is to regulate and make appropriate use of black market banking. The third is to create progressive business networks which encourage cooperation and development. And the fourth is to provide access to the local consumer market.
Okay, so when we were there, we went to many municipal offices, and there was no talk about investing in the arts. And so we looked at we looked at New York and Los Angeles and just other major cities, and art and innovation go hand in hand. And so we also suggested that the government create art programs and have an art economic strategy. So first, by building regional art and creativity clusters, we also suggested that the government sponsor art projects by offering grants to local artists to support artistic activity and creativity. And also, because Shenzhen is constantly being built and is just a prime location for architects, there is no architecture program at any of the colleges, so we thought it would be beneficial to the region to cultivate local talent architecturally by suggesting that they have a strong architecture program, because most of the things that are built there are done by foreign architecture firms.
Okay, before we go to the next area, I just want to go back to this particular map. Professor Yuan, who is our host, is a economic researcher at the university and prepared this map. And for those of you who don't read Chinese, it may be hard. The only reason I wanted to come back to it, it may have been hard for you to follow what's on that map and the importance of it. That is the Pearl River. These are all the provinces in the Pearl River Delta. What you see are industry clusters of every conceivable possible product that they could in fact produce, which they do not now totally produce. They have a fairly narrow gauge, not narrow, but they do not produce a totally diversified set of industries. Professor Yuan was working on this concept, and it really fit into the notion, the strategy that the students worked on, and that is import substitution. For those of you who are not familiar with the term, we're using it not in the traditional international economic sense, but in the sense that Jane Jacobs used in her book, Cities and the Wealth of Nation and Regions. And that is, you produce, you consume what you produce. And that's fundamentally what the Chinese are trying to figure out how to do. So they were thinking of this, but they couldn't quite take the notion of a diversified industrial base and build a strategy around it. And many of the strategies that you heard the students describe are, how do we in fact move into a lot of these areas? And a lot of the areas are higher tech, requiring more skill, levels that require, and we'll get into other strategies following it, that would support that kind of a movement. So I just wanted to give you a little background on this chart that we understand, our students understand because they could read the chart, but we did not translate it into English. And the reason we didn't is that this is their thinking that we're helping to refine. Okay, let's move on to, I think the person who did the consumer protection and branding isn't here, and I think I'm assigned that. Is that the, okay. I thought maybe they would pick it up, but they said no. What's the real problem that they're encountering? They do not have the rule of law, and they don't have the skills to do two things, or several things. One of them is intellectual property protection, and the second is enhancing consumer confidence in domestic products, namely consumer safety. In order to have both products, you need to have a rule of law, or you cannot have intellectual property rights. And they're really struggling with that, and we provided suggestions for how they could improve that. And the second is, how do you get consumer protection? What we found, and we found this not only from our research, but we found it from what the students themselves personally contributed. The Chinese people are somewhat reluctant to buy Chinese products because they don't have confidence in them. So if you want to develop a consumer economy, you have to have confidence in the products that you in fact are going to buy. The second thing we found, and I'm going to simplify a very complicated and extraordinary accomplishment, but what Shenzhen, Guangzhou have done, not so Hong Kong, but what they have done is that they've produced product that they get onto ships, that then get distributed here, and the distribution and marketing is done elsewhere. They do not have the systems in place to do that within their own country. They don't have the infrastructure. They have logistics centers, but the logistics centers can't get that product to all the markets that are needed. And furthermore, what you find in China is you have incredibly fragmented markets. You don't have mass media, and you don't have centralized markets, and therefore, if you're going to develop a consumer society, you're going to need ways to get the product to markets on a scale that, in fact, can be commercially viable and profitable. Final thing that they don't have that we covered was they don't have consumer credit. You basically buy your products with the cash and with the money that you have in hand. I'm simplifying it, and it's much more complicated than that. But what do you need in order to develop consumer credit? You got to have some form of regulatory and legal framework so that, in fact, you can develop consumer credit. Okay, these are. That essentially was the economic strategy that we presented. And I mean, it's pretty simple. Import substitution, you've got to develop consumer support capacities, and then you have to develop the expertise to develop different kinds and different sophisticated levels of product. And not just low end, not just middle end, but upper end product. By the way, we visited the company, what was the name? I forget, that produces the telephones. Huang. The majority of the phones that are used in this room are produced in a factory, are not in a factory, but in a company that we in fact visited. It's as sophisticated as any product or any factory that you could visit in the United States. It was very impressive. Okay, the consumer, who's doing air quality? Okay, Karine, you're up.
So for protecting environment, we focus on air quality improvement. And you can first take a look at these two pictures on the slide. It is obviously seen that the left picture is the sky is grayer with lower visibility. However, based on the current air quality monitoring system, they all meet the standard of satisfying level. And the reason why it happened is because the current air quality monitoring system doesn't include PM 2.5. And PM 2.5 indicates the particles that have diameters less than 2.5 micron. And since it is, even though it is a very serious problem in China, it is still not included in the monitoring system. And then the next slide, we have two graphs. We can see the status quo and the severity of the PM 2.5 pollution in Shenzhen and the Pearl River data. The above is, we can see the color is red, means the thickness of PM 2.5 is really high. And the picture at the bottom shows the annual haze days in Shenzhen from 1983 to 2007. We can see that the annual haze day has been gradually increased and reach a peak in the year of 2007. And after 2007, because the government of Shenzhen have done something to improve, so we can see the annual haze days have been decreased, but there is still a long way to go. So our first recommendation is that we think Shenzhen government should develop PM 2.5 standards. And based on our research and the days we have visited in Shenzhen, we think there are several recommendations that might be feasible for Shenzhen government to improve the air quality. The first, we think it is possible for Shenzhen to establish cap and trade policy, which means to build a trade market for air emissions. And so the manufacturer have to obey the emission quota set by the government, and they can sell the quota to other manufacturers if they reduce their emission. And also, we think the key to improving air quality not only lies in well-writing policies, but also the enforcement for these policies. So we think uniform and strict enforcement is really important. Government should define the rules clearly and make sure that every business segment understands these rules and help the business to meet the standard set and fine them if they don't meet the standard. And also we think there can be more direct communication between experts and Shenzhen and the higher decision makers of Shenzhen government. They can hold regular planning sessions, and we think the government can encourage more scientific research and provide more fundings for air quality projects. Besides, it's also very important for them to improve transparency and trust about air quality conditions, about the standard set, and the real-time reporting to the public. The time we went to Shenzhen was like middle May to June, and in this August, Shenzhen have hold World University Games, and that's why they also very care about the air quality. So in the World University Game, they had care restriction policy, which is very similar as what they had in Beijing Olympic Games. And we think they can extend the car restriction policy after the game. So it is one of the recommendations. So at last, we think there are also some renewable energy opportunities they can seek to find more ways to improve the air quality. And these are our recommendations for air quality improvement for Shenzhen government.
Thank you very much, Karine. And now we'll go to what turned out to be one of the more interesting and surprising issues. I thought the air quality would be, but it turned out that labor force and labor force development may very well be China's most difficult issue. So to handle that, we're going to go to Miao Miao.
Okay. The reason why we brought up this migrant workforce attraction is because the migrant worker shortage problem in China, and Shenzhen also have this problem, although a lot of the government officials consider it as a phenomenon or trend instead of a problem. And to deny this, they have two arguments. The first one is the labor shortage in Shenzhen is only a seasonal problem, because they say during the Spring Festival every year in China, a lot of the migrant workers went back to their hometown and reunite with their family. And then when they return back, there won't be a problem like this. But according to the data we found, this problem actually happened all year long. And the second one is Shenzhen plan to upgrade their industrial structure, which means they are going to drive those labor-intensive industries out of Shenzhen, which means they don't need a lot of migrant workers to work for those factories. So in the long term, they won't have this problem. But if this plan, their plan really efficient, how many of those factories, those labor-intensive factories, really want to go out? And according to the data we found, only in Longgang and Bao'an district in Shenzhen, in two districts, there are still 10,000 labor-intensive factories here, which means in the short term, even in the long term, they're still going to face this kind of problem. And in the Pearl River Delta, they also have this migrant worker shortage problem, and an estimate of 2 million people are shortage in 2011, which means not only inside Shenzhen, the factory in Shenzhen also need to compete with the factories in other cities in Pearl River Delta. And in the next slide, we have a population pyramid in China to show you 50 years later the decreasing of the working age population in China, which going to raise a problem for a lot of the factories in Shenzhen in 50 years. And we have some recommendations for this problem. First one is, if we want to keep the stay of these migrant workers, we have to provide them with a good welfare system. So we need to build up a wage protection system and increasing the penalties for enterprises with wage arrears. And also another strong incentive for this migrant workers to stay is to become a legal resident in Shenzhen. So far, they have a score system for these migrant workers or for all the immigrant people, but it's not specifically for migrant workers, which means they cannot compete with other migrant workers with high intelligence or well-education background, which means the chance for them to be a legal resident is really low. So we have to build up a regulatory system especially for migrant workers. And the last one is to research and development of automation of different industries, just like what Japan did in those years, to save some labor force in the future to be used in the basic infrastructure construction, to build up more upskill or technician or technical machine or factories to save those labors. And that's pretty much on for migrant worker shortage problem.
I mean, it's really fascinating that we always think that China is just overwhelmed with people and that they're not going to have any labor force development issues. But when you look at short-term issues and then you look at the long-term demography, probably the real, if I could say, the underbelly of China's economic growth is going to in fact be how do they develop their people. Not any different than the issue that we're facing in this country. Okay, now to the point of how do we develop all these people, Vanessa?
So, as Miao Miao has just mentioned, the PRD region is likely to face labor shortage in the near future. So part of our storyline is to convince our client that if you really want to become the next Silicon Valley or a high-tech hub, as they envision themselves to be, then they really have to invest more in education. So having said that, we recommend them to put more resources not only in higher education, but also in teacher training and senior high school education, because right now we find that they don't even have enough school for senior high schools. So we also recommend them to grant more autonomy to universities that are currently in Shenzhen and expand opportunities for people who actually live in Shenzhen to pursue higher education so that they can develop their own homegrown talents. So in order to convince them, we show them this chart right here. We show them that based on our conversation with as senior official with in the education bureau, we find that Shenzhen really, compared to Shanghai and Hong Kong, they really underinvest in their education. And even comparing to the OECD average, they really fall behind. So we tell them, if you really want to get ahead of your game, then you really need to focus more on education. And part of it is what Miao Miao has mentioned. They don't even have educational opportunities for children of migrant workers. And so I think as a team, we think that would be a great opportunity to start with, that they invest more in education, starting with basic education, with that are more inclusive. So another strategy that we have is how they import talent. This pie chart is a survey that asks people in Shenzhen whether they would stay in their area in the future. And as you can see, around 60% are not sure whether they will stay and work in Shenzhen in the future. And the reason behind it is, if you can read Chinese, some of the major reasons are the high housing costs and transportation issues. So if the government really wants to develop to a high-end industry and a more high-tech hub and attract talent like us, then we recommend that our client to implement the recommendations we just said before, including providing better housing and education and transportation, things like that.
And before we go to the next level, there was a dynamic in the presentation, and Elizabeth was our moderator for the overall presentation. And they all got together and they said, now, what is going to make our host listen to us? And what's the storyline that we're going to use so that when we make this presentation, it isn't a report with a series of recommendations. And they developed a storyline, and Elizabeth, who was the overall moderator, got to deliver the storyline. Now, do you remember what our storyline was, Elizabeth?
I think we tried to propose that in order to attract talent like us, international talent, in order to make the region more of an innovative area rather than a manufacturing area, these are the things that we would want to have here that would lure us to a place like this. So, and so one of the things obviously is like a cleaner air, more art. What kind of place would we want to raise our kids in if we chose to live here?
And it really drove home. I have to tell you, they really figured out how do they grab a hold of the people that they're talking to. Mind you, these are university presidents and school presidents and ministry heads. And they basically said, if you want to be successful, you got to get us here. And if you want us here, you got to do these things. And it had a real sobering influence on them. And I'll tell you a little more of how we know that. So let's move to the last area.
So basically, we are talking about regional integration all the time. So my part is pretty much a summary of my colleagues' opinion. And so for regional integration, we strongly recommend Shenzhen government to draft a regional integration development strategy in 3 aspects. The first one is air quality, because it's pretty obvious. There's no chance for one single city to deal with air quality issue by himself, because air flows everywhere. Because, for example, the air we are breathing right now may be from Ethiopia or somewhere like that. So my point is, we strongly recommend Shenzhen to take the geographic advantage for the interregional cooperation with Hong Kong. We strongly recommend that to introduce a new level of technology cooperation of air quality system from Hong Kong, and that will help them a lot in the field of air quality improvement. And the second part is manufacturer transformation. Because why we're gonna do that is we look at 9 core cities in Pearl River Delta, and 8 cities out of them, their major manufacturer is electronic for information industry, and the relationship between them is pretty much like competition instead of collaboration. So which will result in a low efficient of resource allocation. So basically, we recommend them to establish an efficient and transparent negotiating instrument. So it will have long-term and short-term benefit. For short-term, it will help them focus on environmental protection and industrial regulation, and in the long term, they will expand to optimize industrial structures, infrastructure construction, and also education, culture, and social welfare. And the second part is we want the resource to be well allocated. So transportation is rather important. So we recommend to develop a regional integration in developing logistic network inside the Pearl River Delta, and our colleague has already discussed that previously. And the third part, we want Shenzhen government to develop regional integration strategies in the labor force perspective, because when we were in Shenzhen, all the government in Shenzhen always tell us the same stories. Like Shenzhen has grown from a little fishing village for 30 years, and now it's a metropolitan city now. So the city is really young, and the average age for the city is 27. So this city is full of unskilled workers and low educated laborers. So basically, we want Shenzhen to cooperate with other big cities within Guangdong area like Guangzhou. So they will have more cultural background, and we want them to make their labor flow from both cities. And another suggestion is that we want Shenzhen we want to further promote this. It's like this. So if the labor force want to go between Shenzhen and Hong Kong, they have to go through a process of government. They have to apply for visas. So we want to Shenzhen to develop a new system. So it will speed up the labor force between the two cities, which will help them to get a better labor force and educated. Yeah, that's all.
Let me just summarize the strategy that the students presented, and I'm going to go back to the work of our host, Professor Yuan. This is the industrial map: Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Macau's over here, and then I'm not going to go through all the additional provinces, but their strategy is Hong Kong is the trading center. Shenzhen will become the high-tech center. They want to take a lot of the low value, high polluting industries, and they want to disperse them. And they have a whole set of industries to disperse around the basin, and then to further develop an infrastructure that will get those products to not only to the globe through export, but also to their consumers. A real shortcoming in carrying out, and why they haven't been successful, a number of reasons, ranging from labor force development to consumer protection to developing credit, etc. Those are micro strategies, or more operational strategies that we recommended they implement. Secondly, or next we focused on, if they want to develop this kind of an import substitution strategy, then they really do need to operate the basin, the Pearl River Delta, as a true integrated region. And how do you get, and this is the issue that they struggled with the most, and that is, how do you get the competition that goes on between Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Macau? These cities compete with one another like our industries compete with one another. Mind you, the cities and the industries are, in many respects, one and the same there. And that's one of the issues they challenged us with. Give us strategies so that we, in fact, can integrate ourselves. So, low-hanging fruit, make it easier to go between these two. The next low-hanging fruit is truly develop a coordination between the airports. And we went through a lot of airport designs and implications, and they have a lot of airports that are not running at full efficiency, and they don't take advantage of their infrastructure. And then they need their ports coordinated, and then they also need this logistics distribution center. So develop a integration of infrastructure. The third, and probably the most interesting recommendations the students came up with, and that is, let's start an emission trading program among these various factories. If you're going to push the higher polluting factories out of the urban areas, and furthermore, right now, and Joyce could have taken you through this, but the air quality flows are Fushan to Guangzhou. Guangzhou then impacts on Shenzhen, and Shenzhen then impacts on Hong Kong. The prevailing winds all make their pollution impact on one another. So the recommendation was, let's develop a cap and trading system where we're going to, in fact, gain economic efficiencies for cleaning up air quality and pollution. In order to do that, they've got to set standards differently, and they have to set up the institutional structure to do it. By the way, it's a level of planning and integration that we in the United States struggle with and are not even close to doing. I teach a course on megaregions and have done work on megaregions throughout this country and abroad. The level of integration that we propose to them is will challenge the best and the most capable of all regions. That's the strategy we presented. Let me just spend 2 or 3 minutes on what the reaction was of our hosts, and the work that we're now doing to further this work. The previous dean of the university came up to one of our students at the end of the presentation, and it was Sarah Newman. And he came up and said to her, how did you, in 2 weeks, identify every critical path linchpin issue that we think is important? And more importantly, how did you come up with those strategies? And you can read the strategies in detail with the report, I think, that was distributed to you. He said, how did you come up with those strategies? And he went on further to say, our challenge now is to make your ideas our ideas. And he says, we need to figure out how we're going to do that. That I think is probably the most succinct testimony that I can share with you on how their work was received. What we're doing currently is that the students briefed RAND. RAND has a contract with a community, it's a CDI, a community development.
Institute? No, it's a high-level government in Guangzhou, and in Guangzhou they're trying to develop central business district, and so RAND is having a contract with them to develop strategies, which is very similar to ours, and basically how to build a high-tech hub and all that stuff. So it shows you how competitive even between like the same province and between cities in China.
Next, the students are sharing their work with their colleagues, and then next week Joanna and Joyce run another program where they bring individuals from the Shenzhen University here for a training institute. So Joanna has arranged a 3-hour session where we'll continue to say, here's the major ideas that we developed. And in that session, we will go through in more in-depth what we're doing here that can flesh these ideas out for them. And then finally, the students are identifying places where either the report or the key ideas in the report can be written up and published in China. Our host took our entire report and published it in the local newspaper, and then published it in the scholarly journals or magazines in China. So the strategy that the students concluded was the best thing we can do is communicate our work to people who have an interest in it and get the ideas out in circulation in the policy arenas in China that can use it. Let me stop, and students, do you have anything more that you want to, any bottom liners that you want to share? You want to share how much fun it was to prepare the final report? They prepared their report in English and in Chinese. The slideshow, and I showed you the Chinese slides, they did that in Chinese, and then they wrote up a shorter version that was the version that got published. So let's stop with that. Are there questions?
We have about, close to 30 minutes for questions. So.
We wanted to leave enough time so we could talk to you about what. Yes.
Where you're talking in the last point about development of automation, and so that's in response to the shortage of these migrant workers who then are not able to get education and so forth. In other words, typically you would have more automation if the wages are rising, because then it makes automation, gives it people who use automation a competitive advantage over those who are paying high wages. And so is that one of the issues that you were responding to with that point?
The automation one is responding to the population pyramid we show you in the previous slides. Because we estimate that in like next 50 years, there's going to be like a half of the working age population is going to gone. So not only like in Provo Delta, also in whole China, we're going to face this problem. Since they still have so many labor-intensive factories there, probably they will think of like using automation as a way to save the labor for the future use. or compete in this regional area.
Seems like a long planning.
Yeah, long-term planning.
But I think you brought up an interesting issues. In our initial research here, before we go to China, right now they do have like a minimum wage system, but one of the things that we came up with before we go there, you mentioned about raising wages, and I think that is another key for them to develop a domestic market, because if 80% of their population cannot buy the stuff that they actually produce, then there's no domestic market. So I think you brought up an interesting point that they should pay them more, and so that they have more income to actually consume. And right now, even going to a doctor, I think if that workers are earning a minimum wage, it costs them like 10 or 13% for one doctor visit. So that's why part of our recommendation include providing better public services, so that they have more money to spend and more income to consume.
The way that was done in other countries is by labor unions, so would you want to
I think right now the union is really weak in China, even though the central government do have guidance for local areas to enact their own labor law, including paying them on time and paying them fairly with overtime. But the enforcement aspect is still very lacking, and oops, I lost myself. But yeah, so right now they're still kind of and then other thing is the political aspect of labor union. The Chinese government is very reactive to organized union. Like, they think it would threaten their power. So I think that is another reason that why it's not feasible right now.
I mean, they had a lot of discussions of this in Mau Mau to share with you. She almost gotten into a, I won't say a fist fight, but a shouting match with the officials at the Shenzhen Reform Commission meeting, which is their highest level policy. They denied they had any of these problems. You want to say anything about that, Mama?
And also the wage increasement is a very good point, but we also have other problems in China linked to which it's about like cultural stuff, because Chinese people like tend to save money instead of like spending all of them. One reason is like we have a kind of incomplete social welfare system, so we don't have like sense of security to spend all of our money. And also, if you take a look at the media report, the wage of the migrant workers are soaring recently because they don't have so many people. They want to increase their like factory as a strategy. They want to increase their wage to attract those migrant workers. So it's kind of complicated issue.
Just to finish the discussion, the basic strategy they presented was, if you're going to develop a Delta import substitution strategy, then you need to have the incomes for people to buy it and to really appeal to their economic sense. And furthermore, to impress upon them that in order for them to sustain growth over time, they're going to need to develop this consumer economy. And that the pragmatics of doing that may lead them to deal with both the immigration issue as well as the wage level issue.
I just want to add one point to the labor union, because as far as we find out for Shenzhen, like I think most of the labor force, I mean for migrant workers, they are not really legally employed. So they don't really have they just move from one construction to another. So they are not really, it's not a permanent position for them, it's kind of temporary, which will last like 3 to 6 months. It's not really, it's different case by case. So it's really hard for them to communicate with each other, and I highly doubt they have the sense of protection themselves.
Okay, we'll take a credit.
Well, just a couple of points. Very well done, very impressive, the work you've done. A couple of points. One question that I'm not sure I fully understood, and that's you began with the air quality issues, and then you switched to the workforce development. I'm not sure, are the two separate problems, or there's a linkage there? Secondly is I mean, China does have a lot of rural unemployment problem, right? Huh? Huge unemployment problem in rural. And so, so the migrant problem is not going to go away, right? I mean, it's going to continue to remain there. So, going to Philip's point about going to the automation and more high productivity jobs is not going to help taking care of the migrant population. So I wonder if there is an issue here from the national government, the policy of the national government, which is trying to find kind of industrial policy that will lead to creating jobs for the rural migrant, versus the regional policy, which is opposed to that. Is there a conflict between that?
I think there's one policy that the government is issued.
Yeah.
They are thinking about, like, the number of migrant workers keep increasing all the time. So basically, migrant workers from rural areas, because people tend to go from the mid-east of China to the coastline. So because coastline is more developed. So right now, Chinese government want to develop, they want to change the focus of development into west and east part. So they want the migrant workers go back to their hometown and to and reduce the labor force problem on the coast. And we have been talking about this for at least 20 years from now, just after the opening up reform in the year of 1979, and this is long term because cities on the coast have already developed for 30 years, and we just starting development in the west part. So this takes a long time, take a long period for them to balance the different set of development level right now. Yeah, that's
Meanwhile.
yeah.
And I think the unemployment part, there may be misunderstanding of you have heard college graduate can get job after they graduate in China, but not so much as it's mostly the skill job. They don't have enough skill job. That's the problem of unemployment of college graduates in China. But the migrant workers, they mostly work in low skill jobs, and right now there's still not as big an unemployment among migrant workers. And in response to your first question, back to our storyline, we want to convince our client, if you want to attract talents like us and other talent from other part of China or overseas, then you have to focus on this kind of quality of life issue, such as air quality and whether you have the educational opportunities for their kids, if they want the families to settle down there, or if they want to further develop themselves. And that's why they kind of got put together.
Could have it was really a part of a marketing explanation strategy of motivating them to want to do it for the positioning, and it was a labor force attraction issue. On the second issue that you raised, we spent a long time talking about not only a 7-regional Pearl River Delta, but the Pearl River Delta's nexus to the further inland jurisdictions, and they actually are now beginning to look at a 9-province strategy for this area, recognizing that they have to move their development strategy eastward. And I mean, they have huge population employment dilemmas. They've got a high level of unemployment of college graduates. In fact, I thought Joyce was going to talk about a paper she wrote for me in a previous class on unemployed college graduates. And secondly, they have a huge population, not educated, trained at all, and this area that we're looking at, the Pearl River Delta, is the immigration area. In fact, it's the most diverse population. It's got the most diverse mix of the different languages and cultural backgrounds of any place in China. So it's the place where the immigrants have come to. And the dilemma that Mau Mau and the leadership in the Reform Commission came to grips with is, hey, you do have this shortage. You're not training these people, and it was the reason for the educational recommendations. So there was a recognition of the dilemmas they faced, and then the question is, what's the strategy that they can employ to deal with it, and how do they get leverage on the issue? And up to now, they've spent their money on infrastructure. And they've spent their money on infrastructure to get goods that they produce to other people that may not be the growth strategy for the future, given what's happening globally. So I think when at the end of the day, I think they were quite intrigued with this strategy. We have one over here, and then we'll get to you, Chet. We have one over here.
Okay, so we might need to ask the questions. Get a few questions.
Get a few questions so we can get more people on the table. Yeah.
Okay. So,
you had mentioned, I think in one of the earlier slides, about affordable housing. And I understand that the class is a studio, overseas studio. I took part in one myself with Dr. Banerjee. And time is short and limited. And so you only really have a cursory, a very short time to do a cursory overview, kind of just a very general SWOT analysis. But I mean, you've identified the problem, but is there any real true practical strategy to actually implement that? You had mentioned that you're using Hong Kong as a paradigm for affordable housing. I would submit that that's actually a very bad paradigm because I think most people would know that Hong Kong has a very aggressive market pressures on that place. And that, according to Dr. Banerjee, it also has one of the highest Gini coefficients disparities in the entire world of a developed country. You have a very disparate class of rich as well as the underprivileged. Is that something that you're actually realistically using?
But then they also provide public housing to
50%
low-income
of people live in public housing. I mean, and I think that the conditions, I think anybody would submit, is actually less than desirable.
Well, if you go to Shenzhen, you'll see they kind of live in even worse conditions.
There was also another. There was also another element that we borrowed if you read the housing section of the report, and that is this rule of law that we spoke about does not exist within Chinese planning law. China's planning structure is an allocative structure, and it's not a market-based structure. And they do not have the vehicles in place to go from allocation principles into providing for the market. And given it got the person who did the housing, so that I can.
No, I think that's
Zach did it, so I'm having to report his work. What the strategy was, don't just have a few housing sites identified in your plan, have enough housing sites, and furthermore have a rule of law so that those housing sites, in fact, can be built as housing. Right now, they're built as factories. So what they do is they build a lot of factories, they don't build a lot of housing, the housing they do have gets pumped up, and they have no real planning market way of dealing with the issue. And that's what we were borrowing from Hong Kong primarily. And furthermore, it's an issue China's going to have to get more accustomed to doing more than framework plans. They're going to have to do market-based planning with real translation between planning and allocation of resources. We have the same problem here in the States. I mean, I'll tell you, the most difficult program I administered was the housing allocation issue. And even there, we didn't do enough of a job. But they don't have even the concepts of how to do that in place. So if they want to get a housing market that will work more effectively and not have speculation, they're going to have to do things like that. Does that get to you? I mean, they really thought through that issue. Chet? Well, go ahead and, well, in fact, why don't we get a couple of questions on the table and then we'll, your question?
Yeah, you just answered my question somehow, because I was about to ask about the rule of law question. How does the absence or the lack of full rule of law affects the economic development of the whole region? Because as you just mentioned, it's kind of undermined every sort of policy recommendation we have just made. So I would like to see like your view and whether your team had some thought about how it can be somehow solved.
Okay. And your comment was?
My comment was kind of a peripheral comment on top. So your comment about the market pressures in Hong Kong not really paralleling with what's going on in China and maybe specifically Guangdong province and Shenzhen. So I think a bit of encouraging news maybe, and I don't know if you have continued dialogue with the people in Shenzhen, is, you know, a couple of weeks ago on the provincial level, Guangdong province announced that they're finally willing to go ahead and open up their municipal bond markets to kind of accelerate their infrastructure growth. And so part of the big hindrance in that was developing enough credit transparency for investors to purchase those bonds. And so I was wondering, you know, I think that's kind of encouraging news in terms of what you guys were talking about with developing consumer markets and perhaps that even leading to access to the kind of housing we're talking about. And so I don't know if that was brought up, and you know, if it wasn't, maybe something to consider communicating to them in terms of ideas. But
there are two related questions on how you get to a rule of law. Let's see, we had another question, Chet, and then oh, excuse me, your question.
Yes, I guess one of the reasons for the Shenzhen success may be the freedoms enjoyed by the industries and the preferential policies from the government. So I wonder if they want to upgrade or change their industries, whether your recommendations think about the changing role of public administration or the role of government.
Okay, and Chet?
I'm going to suggest 4 or 5 possible ideas, mostly from my experience in Kazakhstan and other parts of the world. But let me start, though, with your question. In terms of development of a rule of law in a place which asserts that it has sovereignty, I would suggest what Anne-Marie Slaughter at Princeton teaches, that it is disaggregate the sovereignty. Don't try to deal with everything. Find places where practices, in fact, are the rules that are accepted, and go ahead and enforce those, and bit by bit establish a rule of law. That is basically what we did in Kazakhstan back when the Russian Federation and the others were falling apart due to a lack of rule of law. But a couple of questions and comments on your excellent comment. To what extent does China successfully use internal passport controls to handle problems of migration and so on? For example, Kazakhstan is currently restructuring the internal passports. Those have been used throughout the former Soviet Union and in most other countries in the world as a way of managing imports or changes of people mobility. And a second point that I thought was interesting, in this country and in every other place where I've worked, we use a whole lot of subsidized consumption. You mentioned, for example, housing. Say in Sacramento, where I live downtown, there are probably 8 times more free or subsidized housing units than those that are lived in by people who pay for them like me. So subsidized housing is a big one. But also, we use subsidization for food and so on. Probably 25% of our people, certainly in Kazakhstan, are eating subsidized food. But then on the other hand, we tax some other food to prevent its consumption. Are they doing both of those things in China? As we usually use taxes in order to limit and divert movement. And then one final one. In terms of the higher education, the country has been fairly successful and recognize that when you get this big pool of well-educated people and no jobs for them, you do like we did in the Kennedy administration. We created the Peace Corps, and we sent them all out of the country so they wouldn't be involved here in the U.S. And anyone who doesn't think that was much of the reason just wasn't around there. You do have to find a way of dealing with the transitioning of a very highly educated workforce.
Okay, so we have 4 questions on the table, and let's take them in the order they were posed, and that is, what was our thoughts on the rule of law? Did anyone want to try? I know that was basically the work of Zach and Sarah. They're not here, but did any of you want to take a? Go ahead, Joe.
I want to answer a question about the subsidized consumption. And
No, wait a minute. Let's hold that. Let's deal with them in order, Joy. I'm going to call on you in a minute. The basic strategy that we recognized was that Shenzhen had the opportunity to act independently of Beijing in a lot of different ways and exercised that independence on a number. I can give you, we can go through a number of examples. The mayor tried to establish a university not under the control of the Beijing Department of Education, but under a private school. They're trying to demonstrate their independence on let's just say on a number of different areas. They were intrigued with our recommendations on rule of law as something that they potentially could do administratively without having to get central control and having to change the constitution of the country and all of the other cultural dimensions. I mean, we had a number of discussions as to that might be a vehicle for doing it. We didn't get, as you said, it's a studio, and we're there for 2 weeks. They were intrigued with some of those recommendations, and I think they wanted to have further dialogue. How might they, in fact, do that? How do they use the, let's just call it the experimentation license that they have been given by Beijing to advance? And by the way, China, central China looks to this particular area as the innovator in the country, and they've been given license to do so. That would be the vehicle that they would, that we talked about. And I think it follows through, Chet, with what you were suggesting in Kazakhstan. On the issue of the bond market and the financing, we went through a long discussion. We didn't cover it in our report here, but how, in fact, do you get more financing of different instrumentalities into the economic structure? We felt they needed to deal with the black market in financing, which is a real problem in developing innovation. They need to develop more instrumentalities so they can have the financing to, in fact, undertake the kinds of investments that we were suggesting. But that was an area that Zach in particular, Zach Elgard, really, you'll see it fleshed out in the report. Okay, the third issue on public administration, does anyone want to tackle that? And let me see if I understand your question. What might they do to increase and improve the public administration profession to be able to deal with these kinds of issues? Is that a fair interpretation?
How they change, because I guess in the new era, the government's role should be changed. So whether you think about such changes in your recommendations or...
Yeah, how did they reform the Hoku, for example? Vanessa, you got very passionate about this one.
Well, that kind of relates to Professor Newland's question about internal passage. Right now, China is still under hukou system, which was implemented in the 1950s to control the population. But in fact, when the migrant workers go to the Pearl River Delta to work, according to the rules, they're supposed to register for temporary resident card. but a lot of them don't. And so it ends up, when you look at the government census, the statistic that the government conducted, they really undercount the number of migrant workers in the cities. And I think the hukou system is a system that is not effective anymore, and it doesn't control the population. It jeopardizes people's ability to get housing, because without a card or an ID, like in the United States, you can't even get drive or like get your own apartment. So I think, and because
Quickly,
okay,
we're going to.
well, this basically, I think as public administrators, if you want to work in China in the future, it would be great if you can implement systematic change bit by bit. I think it's not gonna, the system is not gonna end in one day, but hopefully they will soon.
Thank you, Vanessa. And Joyce, quick 30 seconds.
Yeah, Vanessa just quickly answer the question, because we do have subsidizing housing, but only for those who have hukou. So we have subsidizing housing for those permanent residents of Shenzhen, but the majority of low-income individuals in Shenzhen are migrant workers, so they are now involved in our social welfare system. So if we want to have affordable housing, they better go home. So yeah, that's how we manage that.
Anyway, let me thank you all for your questions. They were superb, and for your attention, and for the students in their presentation. In a work way, they had fun. Is that a fair statement? But thank you all, and thank you, Nicole, for arranging it.